I, along with many other people in public education, have spoken ad nauseum about the importance of moving away from standardized tests to determine student aptitude and understanding, and moving toward more diverse and practical methods such as project-based assessments. We believe that we can best improve education by properly training teachers and judging them based on how well they apply that training. We should then afford enough professional trust to our teachers to be the ones who assess their students in the ways that best fit their learning and expression styles in authentic ways. This moves us from just the assessment of learning to assessment for learning. I'd like to share a true story with you to impart what that looks like in action. The main subject's name has been changed, as it is in every story I write based on a former student, but the rest is exactly how it happened. Keep in mind as you listen that the assessment style I discuss in the story is one that many teachers are petrified to use because so much pressure has rolled downhill from their states to their school boards to their administrators to them that they feel if they aren't using every opportunity to simply cover standards in a way that directly prepares the kids for tests, that they are harming their students' chances to succeed. The story is called Beowulf's Boat. Tyshawn stood in front of the classroom, smiled brightly, and proclaimed to his audience of about 28 other students, "I made a boat." Those 4 words were the most he had consecutively strung together in his first 7 weeks of the class. The word boat was a misnomer. It was actually a model, and it was a model of a ship. It wasn't just any model, however, nor was it just any ship. Tyshawn's painfully introverted nature made it easy to mask how he learned and how he expressed his knowledge and talents. On this day, Tyshawn held before his classmates a brilliantly crafted scale model of an Anglo-Saxon ship. His model represented what the legendary hero Beowulf most likely would have used to sail the raging seas during the general time period and region of his Old English tales. This particular model was properly proportioned and historically accurate. It was not merely purchased and assembled. Tyshawn carefully crafted the vessel from what must have been hundreds of toothpicks and superglue. The wood was meticulously pieced together side by side and end to end. Polished copper pennies were used to decorate the gunwales as if they were Saxon shields. A piece of cloth was carefully cut to the shape of a sail and glued into place along the thin wooden crossbars. I imagined how I might attempt to replicate his work, and how much time and patience it would have taken me to produce a replica that still would be inferior to his. When I rushed to show Tyshawn's work to one of his previous teachers, she was stunned by the production. Tyshawn was thought to be a slow, albeit compliant student. He wore dark clothes and an old army jacket to school every day. He got by with a C or a D year after year, and his intense shyness and minimum proficiency on state standardized exams allowed him to coast just under the radar. It wasn't until his 12th grade English class, when we read Beowulf, that his talents had an opportunity to bubble to the surface in an academic setting. It turned out that while he was not fond of writing, he relished reading and listening to stories. The trouble was, Tyshawn hated tests. While he never explicitly told me this, I got the clear impression from his ship project and his later work that he didn't think someone's comprehension of or connection to a story were best assessed by ticking boxes on a piece of paper or on a computer screen. It so happened that I agreed with him. That's why when our class had finally completed the epic tales of Beowulf, I didn't give them a test. I already had a strong idea of how well each of my students understood the stories, the concept of legends, the background of Anglo-Saxons, and their influence on the English language. The secret to knowing all that without a formal test was to pay attention and to engage with my students. It seems most educational policymakers would regard that as a revolutionary concept, if not entirely impossible. To me, bookending the unit of study with a pre- and post-test seems like a lazy, contrived excuse for an educational experience, and a waste of an opportunity to push my students' thinking deeper. Instead of a test, I gave my students options of small projects to undergo as individuals or in small groups. Here are some examples of their choices. They could collect a compilation of songs across multiple eras and genres of music, the lyrics of which touched on similar themes to those found in our reading. If they had the desire and means to do so, they could write, record, and/or perform their own modern songs, not necessarily telling Beowulf's story, but covering those same themes in ways unique to them. They could explore the idea of mythical beasts like the dragon from the legend in order to produce an artistic representation. They would have to design a dragon or other beast which would represent the greatest challenge to Beowulf given his character flaws from the story, or one that would be the most formidable to them due to their own flaws, with explanations for their creations. Some produced sketches or paintings of their monsters. Others worked wonders with cheap putty, and one turned a roll of masking tape in a shoebox into a fearsome demon. They could have written an essay on how the themes of Beowulf related to their modern teenage lives, or to the contrary, a persuasive piece on why reading such literature was a waste of time. They could also propose their own essay that the literature inspired them to explore if the prompts that I'd offered didn't strike them. Students had the option to retell Beowulf's tale using abbreviated acts and puppets that they made themselves using socks, paper bags, and paper cutouts. They would have far less time to deliver the performance than we took to read the whole story, so they would have to determine what scenes to include in their scripts and what belonged on the cutting room floor, and describe how they made the choices they did. Most drew connections to how tough it was for modern filmmakers to have to make movies based on entire novels from their experience. While several other options existed, Tyshawn chose to research Anglo-Saxon vessels with consideration to both function and fashion compared to other ships from that time, then produce a model with a spoken or written explanation for how the product represented the research. It may not surprise you that he opted out of the speaking opportunity. It turned out that the ship was no fluke, and that Tyshawn was brilliant at working with his hands. He was a master craftsman whose genius went untapped for most of his years in school because he went 4 years in high school before an English teacher asked him to do something with his hands other than push a pencil to put the right words in the right places or mark the correct letters on a literature test. Not only did it open the eyes of the teachers who missed out on his brilliance, but the peers with whom he'd attended school for all that time were floored with the magic this quiet young man could perform with basic craft supplies from the dollar store. While reading the Canterbury Tales, Tyshawn could turn a box of pipe cleaners into a stained glass church window, or a handful of popsicle sticks and string into a knight in shining armor. And his classmates knew it. He became an unofficial consultant for his peers, who were inspired to work with their own hands while inspiring him to draw out longer verbal sentences as they pleaded for his guidance with their own projects. I didn't design for any of that to happen. I simply created a space where it was possible to happen. It's a space which exists in too few secondary classrooms across the United States, where too many young adults feel their intelligence and self-worth are tightly and exclusively bound to their aptitude with answering multiple choice questions that are quick and easy to score and which yield results that can easily populate a simple spreadsheet or be blotted onto a shallow graph. Tyshawn, that slow kid who didn't talk much in September, left my class with not only his first A in gears, but with a new self-awareness for how smart he was and what a talent his mind and hands possessed. He left that class with a growing sense of confidence in what he had accomplished and what he could do. Most importantly, students in that class would have readily insisted that Tyshawn did far more for them than to have simply made a boat. He made a difference.